SCLC Today TV. I'm Maynard Eaton, along with our President and CEO, Dr. Charles Steele, and a special guest, the State's Attorney from Baltimore, Ms. Marilyn Mosby. Welcome to SCLC and our show today.
Thank you for having me.
What brings you to Atlanta?
So I'm here. I'm visiting my friend who is DeKalb County District Attorney Sherry Boston, who is leading an event for me tonight. Mayor Kasim Reed is also co-hosting. The Honorable Ambassador Andrew Young, as well as Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. So I'm down here and I'm looking forward to that event.
Well, you kind of become a national face for criminal justice, and Dr. Steele, that's one of your main issues with regard to our partnership with Gilead's Promise. So it's kind of interesting that both of you are interested in the same thing, criminal justice and criminal justice reforms.
Absolutely. What we discovered, Maynard, is that 80% of Americans, not African Americans, basically can't afford an attorney. So what we're doing, we're partnering with Gilead's Promise, and we're bringing about the fact that people need to be treated as humans, regardless of the crime, regardless of the situation. And we actually train people in terms of the kingdom philosophy in representing all aspects of that segment of society. I was talking to a group of scientists just yesterday, and what they was telling me was that, Charles, to hear you talk about love and how love is about giving and not receiving, you know, but I tell them, let me just explain one thing. When you do give, you will receive. That's Bible. So, but they're saying in our profession as scientists, you know, we don't talk love that much. We just talk about what the science is and what we are going to do with our approach. But to bring love into the element of society and people working together through criminal justice reform and Gilead's Promise and other aspects of the courtroom really bring about a promise of commitment that Dr. King always wanted to do, and that's to represent those who are less fortunate than others.
Ms. Mosby, love, you don't see much of that in the criminal justice system necessarily. Somebody called it maybe the new lynching system. How tough has it been for you having to deal with that, both sides, police and the community?
So I think it's really important, and one of the lessons that we have to take away from our ancestors and those who have been down this track before is that systems that were created to dehumanize you, you have to have a seat at the table, right? Meaning the way that you're able to reform that is systemic reform comes from within. And so the same way that you all are working to ensure representation among communities that are disproportionately impacted. Let's just be real. The criminal justice system has disproportionately affected communities of color for far too long, right? At the end of the day, why did I go into this? Why did I want to become a prosecutor? It's because that awesome amount of discretion not only affects defendants and victims, but prosecutorial discretion has collateral consequences on our community. So you think about a prosecutor. The prosecutors decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. And when you think of the fact that 95% of the prosecutors in this country are white and 79% are white men, as a woman of color, I represent, along with, Sherry Boston from DeKalb County, we represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in this country. That's not acceptable, and we have to be at the table in order to reform it. So making the decisions that I made, I know that a lot of folks know me for the Freddie Gray case, and when we talk about challenging the status quo, applying justice fairly and equally to everybody regardless of your sex, your religion, or your occupation, that accountability, right? Had I not had a seat at the table, I'm a black woman living in the heart of West Baltimore raising 2 little girls, had I not been in that position, I don't need cultural sensitivity training to know how young boys like Freddie Gray were being treated by police departments all across this country. And had I not been there, that accountability would not have been had. That accountability led to exposure. You had the Department of Justice report that came in and they exposed the discriminatory policing practices of one of the largest agencies in the country. That accountability led to exposure. That exposure ultimately led to reform. So you now have on a consent decree that is federally enforceable, and we're changing those discriminatory policing practices.
It sounds like both of y'all doing the same thing from different positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. I was just thinking about that, man. I was thinking about Victor Hugo when he said there's more suffering among poor people than it is humanity among the rich. They don't care. They really don't care. And it's systemic. And we must bring about the sensitivity in this, in just having a conversation. you can change folks, and not going in just being radical in terms of your philosophy and what you're trying to do. Share a little love. Again, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
Finally, why are you running for re-election? You had a tough year, a tough term.
So absolutely. I mean, what I've learned in, justice is always what the price paid for its pursuit. And the one thing that I can take away from it is that it's so much greater than me individually. It's not about Marilyn Mosby. It's about what Marilyn Mosby represents. And we need holistic sort of prosecution. We need a different approach. We can't continue to have this tough on crime approach. It's resulted in mass incarceration of brown and black people. And at a time when this country is divided and the federal administration is looking to tout regression as making America great again on the backs of black and brown people, it's bigger than me. It's about reform. It's about pushing an agenda that ultimately we have to better our communities, and the only way in which we can do that is by addressing those systemic issues, ensuring that in a city like Baltimore, where 24% of Baltimore's population lives in poverty, 35% of children live below poverty, that we are finally addressing those systemic issues as to why crimes take place. And that's what I'm attempting to do through my administration and through the holistic approach to prosecution.
Some people have called her a shero with regard to criminal justice reform. Of course, our president has been called a lot of things, including a civil rights hero.
Yes.
I'm Marilyn. This is SCLC Today TV.
Good job, man.
Very good.
Thank you, Dr. Silva.
Oh, thank you.